I didn't plan for any of it. That's the part I keep coming back to. Like if I say it enough times, maybe it starts to feel like the truth instead of an excuse. It was late afternoon, one of those quiet suburban days where everything feels suspended in a kind of dull, comfortable stillness. The kind of day where nothing happens, and somehow that's exactly when everything does. My husband, Mark, had just left for a business trip that morning. He kissed me on the forehead, grabbed his suitcase, and promised he'd be back by Sunday. We'd been married for 6 years. Comfortable, predictable, not unhappy, just settled, like a house you stop noticing the cracks in because you've lived with them so long. His son, Tyler, had moved back in about 3 months earlier. He was 22, too old to feel like a kid, too young to feel like a man who had his life together. He said it was temporary. He dropped out of college, was figuring things out, working some part-time job at a gym across town. I didn't ask too many questions. Mark was just relieved to have him close again. Tyler and I, we got along. Better than I expected, honestly. There was always this awareness between us, though. Not inappropriate, not at first. Just awareness. The kind you don't talk about. The kind you pretend doesn't exist because acknowledging it would make everything complicated. He wasn't a kid anymore. That was impossible to ignore. Tall, confident in that careless way young guys are. Always walking around the house in gym shorts, headphones hanging around his neck, that faint smell of cologne mixed with laundry detergent trailing behind him. I noticed things I shouldn't have noticed. The way his voice had deepened, the way he'd look at me sometimes like he was trying to figure something out. I told myself I was imagining it. I had to. That day, the house felt different the second Mark's car pulled out of the driveway. Quieter, looser, like something invisible had shifted. Tyler got home around 4. I heard the front door slam, then his footsteps heading upstairs. No hey, no small talk. That wasn't unusual. He did that a lot, went straight to his room, like the rest of the house didn't exist. I stayed in the kitchen for a while, rinsing dishes that were already clean, wiping down counters that didn't need it, anything to keep my hands busy. I don't know how long I stood there before I realized the music was loud. Not just loud, blasting. It was coming from his room upstairs, some bass-heavy track that made the floor vibrate slightly under my feet. It felt excessive, like he was trying to drown something out. Or maybe I just wanted an excuse to go up there. I told myself it was about the noise. That's what I keep saying. I walked up the stairs slowly, each step louder in my head than it actually was. The hallway felt warmer than usual, or maybe that was just me. His door was slightly open. That's the detail that won't leave me alone. If it had been closed, I would have knocked. I know I would have. There would have been a barrier, a moment to think, a second chance to walk away. But it wasn't closed. It was just open enough. The music hit harder up there, the bass thumping in my chest. I reached the door without really thinking about how I got there. I remember lifting my hand like I was about to knock anyway, just out of habit. And then I saw him. For a second, my brain didn't even process it correctly. It was like looking at something your mind refuses to label. He was standing by his bed, shirtless, his back partially turned toward the door. His gym bag was on the floor, half unzipped. Sweat still clung to his skin, catching the light from the window. He hadn't noticed me. Or maybe he had, and he just didn't react. Time stretched in a way I can't explain. Every second felt like it was expanding, giving me more than enough opportunity to step back, to say something, to make noise. I didn't. I just stood there. And then he turned. Our eyes locked. That was the moment everything could have ended before it even began. That split second where one of us could have said something normal, something safe, something that would have pushed everything back into the place it belonged. "Hey," he said. Just, hey. Like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't just walked in on something I absolutely shouldn't have. My throat went dry. "Your music's really loud," I managed, my voice sounding unfamiliar even to me. He didn't move to turn it down. He didn't move at all, actually. He just stood there, looking at me. Not embarrassed, not surprised, just looking. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen before, or maybe I had, and I'd ignored it every time. "Sorry," he said, but he didn't sound sorry. I should have left then. That was the moment. Instead, I stepped inside. I don't even remember making that decision. It felt automatic, like my body moved before my brain caught up. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open wider, and suddenly I was in his room, in his space, standing too close, breathing the same air. The music was still playing. Too loud. Too much. "Can you turn it down?" I asked, softer this time. He reached over and grabbed his phone off the bed, tapping the screen. The volume dropped, but it didn't go silent. The bass was still there, quieter now, like a pulse under everything. "Better?" he asked. I nodded, but I didn't leave. That's the part I hate admitting. There was this tension, thick and unspoken, stretching between us. I could feel it in the way my chest tightened, in the way I couldn't quite meet his eyes for more than a second at a time. And yet I kept looking. "You didn't knock," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a question, just a statement. "I thought you weren't home," I lied. He gave this slight smile, almost like he knew I was lying but didn't care. "Door was open," he said. Like that explained everything. Like that made it okay. I should have laughed it off, made a joke, turned around and walked out. Instead, I said, "You should close it." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "Why?" That question hung in the air longer than it should have. Why? Because I'm your stepmother. Because this is wrong. Because none of this should be happening. But none of those words came out. Just, "You should," I said. He took a step closer. Not a big step, just enough to shrink the space between us. Enough that I could see the details I'd been trying not to notice for months. The faint scar near his collarbone, the way his chest rose and fell a little faster than normal. "Or what?" he asked quietly. My heart started pounding in a way that felt almost violent, like it was trying to warn me or stop me. "I'll start knocking," I said, trying to sound like I was in control of the situation. But I wasn't, not even close. He let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. "You can if you want." There was something about the way he said it. Casual, almost dismissive, like the rules didn't matter, like the lines didn't exist unless we decided they did. And I realized, standing there in that moment, that I hadn't been imagining it. That awareness between us, it had always been real. We'd just both been pretending it wasn't. "I should go," I said, even though I didn't move. "Yeah," he replied, but he didn't move either. We just stood there, caught in this strange, suspended moment, where leaving felt just as impossible as staying. And then, without thinking, without planning, I did something I can't take back. I reached out. It was small, barely anything, my hand brushing lightly against his arm, like I needed to prove to myself that he was real, that this moment was actually happening. His skin was warm, too warm, and he didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned into it, just slightly. That was the exact second everything changed. Not when I walked in, not when we locked eyes, right there. Because once that line was crossed, even in the smallest, quietest way, there was no pretending anymore, no going back to normal, no acting like this was just another day in a quiet suburban house. His hand moved next, slow, deliberate. He reached up and gently wrapped my fingers around my wrist, stopping me from pulling away, even though I hadn't tried to. "Don't," he said softly. I don't know if he meant don't stop or don't pretend. Maybe both. All I know is I didn't argue. I didn't pull away. I didn't say anything at all. I just stood there, feeling the weight of what was happening pressing down on me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't push it away. And that scared me more than anything else, because I knew, deep down, that this wasn't an accident anymore. This wasn't something that just happened. This was something we were choosing, even if we hadn't said it out loud yet. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I really did. I laid in bed next to the empty space where Mark should have been, staring at the ceiling like it might give me an answer, like it might rewind time a few hours and let me make a different choice. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt it again. The warmth of Tyler's skin under my fingers, the way he didn't pull away, the way I didn't either. It played over and over, like a loop I couldn't break out of. Not even the moment itself, just that feeling, that shift, like something inside me had cracked open and I didn't know how to close it again. I kept telling myself it was nothing, It didn't mean anything. It was just a weird moment, a boundary crossed without thinking, something that would fade if I just ignored it long enough. That's what I told myself. But my body didn't believe it, because every little sound in the house had me on edge. Every footstep, every door. Every time I thought I heard him moving around downstairs or in the hallway, my chest tightened like I was about to be caught doing something wrong, even though I was alone in my room doing nothing. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. I got out of bed, threw on a hoodie, and went downstairs to the kitchen. The house was quiet, completely still. I poured myself a glass of water and stood there by the sink, trying to focus on something normal, something grounding. It didn't work, because all I could think about was whether he was awake, and why that even mattered to me. I told myself I wouldn't go near his room again. Not tonight, not ever. That was it. One mistake, one moment, done. I took a sip of water, staring out into the dark backyard, when I heard it. Footsteps, soft but unmistakable, behind me. I froze. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. There was this split second where I thought, if I don't look, maybe it's not him. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I imagined it. But then I felt it. That same awareness, that same presence. "You always up this late?" Tyler's voice came from behind me, low, calm, like earlier hadn't happened at all. I turned slowly. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, wearing just a pair of sweatpants, his hair slightly messy like he'd been lying down but couldn't sleep either. And for a second, we just looked at each other, same as before, except now it felt different. He wasn't just someone I lived with anymore, and I hated how clearly I felt that. "Couldn't sleep," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He nodded, like that made sense, like he expected it. "Yeah, me neither." "Of course not." There was a silence that settled between us, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, loaded with everything we hadn't said upstairs. I turned back towards the sink, pretending to rinse my glass just to have something to do. "You do that a lot," he said. "Do what?" "Pretend nothing's going on." My hands stilled under the running water. I shut it off slowly and set the glass down, taking a breath before I turned back to face him. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. It sounded rehearsed, weak. He stepped further into the kitchen, closing the distance between us without hesitation. "Yeah, you do." There was no teasing in his voice, no humor, just certainty. "You came into my room," he continued, his eyes locked on mine. "You didn't leave." My pulse started picking up again, that same overwhelming rush hitting me all over. "I told you why I came in," I said. "For the music?" he asked, one eyebrow lifting slightly. I didn't answer, because we both knew that wasn't the whole truth. "Then why didn't you leave?" he pressed. The question hit harder than it should have, because I didn't have an answer I could say out loud. I crossed my arms, more out of instinct than anything else, trying to create some kind of barrier between us. "It was a mistake," I said finally. There, that was the line, the one that was supposed to shut everything down, end it. He studied me for a moment, like he was deciding whether he believed that or not. "And touching me?" he asked quietly. My breath caught. "That was a mistake too," he added. I felt heat rise up my neck, my face burning in a way that made it impossible to pretend I wasn't affected. "Yes," I said too quickly. He took another step closer. Now he was right in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head slightly to keep eye contact. "I don't think it was," he said. There was something steady about him, something controlled, like he wasn't confused at all, like he'd already figured this out, and I was the only one still trying to pretend. "You're wrong," I replied, but my voice lacked conviction. "Then look at me and say it again," he said. I hesitated, just for a second, but that was enough, because he saw it. That hesitation, that crack. "You can't even do it," he murmured. "I can," I shot back, forcing myself to hold his gaze. It was a mistake. He didn't move, didn't react the way I expected. He just looked at me, and then slowly reached out. My entire body tensed. His hand came up, stopping just short of my face, like he was giving me time to pull away. I didn't. I should have, but I didn't. His fingers brushed lightly against my jaw, barely there, like he was testing something, testing me. "This feels like a mistake?" he asked softly. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I couldn't think, couldn't form a clear thought that made sense. All I knew was that everything felt too intense, too close, too real. "Yes," I whispered. But I didn't move, didn't step back, didn't break the contact. And that was answer enough. His thumb traced lightly along my cheek, slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing the way I reacted. I closed my eyes for a second, just a second, and that was all it took. Because when I opened them again, whatever control I thought I had left, it was gone. "This shouldn't be happening," I said, but the words sounded distant, like they belonged to someone else.
"I know," he replied, but he didn't stop. Neither did I. There was this moment, this final pause, where everything hung in the balance, where I could have stepped back, where I could have walked away, where I could have chosen to be the person I thought I was. Instead, I leaned in. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. It was slow, careful, almost hesitant, like I was giving myself time to stop. I didn't. And when our lips met, it wasn't explosive or chaotic like you'd expect. It was quiet, too quiet, like something that had been building for a long time finally found a way out. And the worst part? It didn't feel wrong in that moment. It felt inevitable. That's what terrified me, because it meant this wasn't just one mistake anymore. This wasn't something I could brush off or pretend didn't matter. This was something real, something we were both fully stepping into. His hand slid from my jaw to the back of my neck, pulling me closer without force, just enough to deepen it, and I let him. I didn't think about Mark. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about anything, except how everything inside me felt like it was unraveling and coming together at the same time. When we finally pulled apart, it wasn't because we wanted to. It was because we had to breathe. We just stood there, inches apart, both of us trying to process what had just happened. "You're gonna regret this," I said, even though I wasn't sure who I was saying it for. "Maybe," he replied, but he didn't sound like he believed it. I didn't either. And that was the moment I realized something even worse than the betrayal itself. I didn't want to stop. That scared me more than anything, because wanting it meant choosing it, and choosing it meant there was no one else to blame. Not him, not the situation, not timing, just me. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning. The next morning didn't feel like a new day. It felt like a continuation of something that should have never started. I woke up before my alarm, my body tense like I'd been bracing for something all night. For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, caught in that quiet space between sleep and reality where nothing has weight yet. Then it all came rushing back. The kitchen, his voice, the way I didn't pull away, the kiss. I turned my head toward Mark's side of the bed, still empty, the sheets untouched, cool, exactly how they'd been when he left. There was something about that, something about how normal everything looked, that made my stomach twist, like I'd stepped into a completely different version of my life overnight, and nothing in the house had caught up to it yet. I sat up slowly, pressing my hands against my face, trying to steady myself. This had to stop. That was the first clear thought I had. Whatever this was, whatever I'd let happen, it couldn't go any further. It was already too much, already crossing lines I couldn't uncross. I told myself I'd avoid him. Simple. Stay busy. Stay out of the house if I had to. Keep everything distant, controlled, normal. I repeated that plan in my head like it was something solid I could hold on to. But even as I got out of bed, I knew how weak it sounded. Because part of me didn't want to avoid him, and that part was getting louder. I forced myself into a routine. Shower, coffee, getting dressed, anything that made me feel like I was still in control. I chose clothes more carefully than usual. Something normal, nothing that could be read into, like that even mattered. By the time I made it downstairs, I thought maybe I'd get lucky. Maybe he'd already left for work. Maybe I wouldn't have to see him right away. But of course he was there, sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone, a mug of coffee in front of him like this was just another ordinary morning, like nothing had changed. He looked up when he heard me, and there it was again, that look, that quiet understanding that passed between us in a second without a single word. "Morning," he said, casual, easy, like the night before didn't exist. "Morning," I replied, keeping my voice steady as I moved toward the coffee machine. Every step felt calculated, every movement deliberate. Don't react, don't engage. Keep it normal. I poured myself a cup, focusing on the sound of the coffee dripping, the warmth of the mug in my hands, anything to avoid looking at him again. It didn't work, because I could feel him watching me. "You sleep?" he asked. "Not really," I said. "Yeah," he nodded. "Same." "Of course." There was a pause. "You okay?" he added. That question hit differently than it should have, because it sounded genuine, and I didn't want it to. "I'm fine," I said quickly. "We shouldn't—" I stopped myself. Too late. His expression shifted slightly, like he'd been waiting for me to say something like that. "Shouldn't what?" he asked. I turned to face him, forcing myself to hold eye contact this time. "This," I said quietly. "Whatever this is." He leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me. "You mean last night?" he said. I swallowed. "Yeah." Another pause. "It happened," he said. Just like that. No hesitation. No attempt to minimize it. No denial. It happened. Like it was that simple. "That doesn't mean it has to keep happening," I replied. There it was. The line I needed to draw. The one I should have drawn before any of this started. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood up, slowly, and suddenly he wasn't across the counter anymore. He was right in front of me again, close enough that I could feel that same tension building all over. "You sure about that?" he asked. My heart betrayed me immediately, speeding up in a way that made it hard to think straight. "Yes," I said, but it didn't sound convincing, not even to me. "Because it doesn't feel like that," he said. His voice was lower now, closer. "It feels like you're trying to convince yourself," he added. I shook my head. "No."
I know exactly what this is. "Then say it," he said. I hesitated. Again. That hesitation was becoming a pattern I couldn't ignore. "It's a mistake," I said finally. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, like he was acknowledging something. "Okay," he said. Relief flickered through me, finally. But it didn't last, because he didn't step away, didn't create distance. Instead, he reached past me, grabbing his mug from the counter behind me, his arm brushing lightly against mine in the process. That small contact sent a sharp, electric feeling up my arm, catching me off guard. And he knew it. I saw it in the slight change in his expression. "You keep saying that," he said quietly, stepping back just enough to take a sip of his coffee. "But your body doesn't seem to agree." Heat rushed through me, a mix of frustration and something I didn't want to name. "That doesn't mean anything," I shot back. "It does," he said simply. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out, because part of me knew he was right, and that made it worse. "I'm serious," I said, forcing my voice to stay firm. "This ends here." He watched me for a second, then set his mug down. "All right," he said. Just like that, no pushback, no argument. It should have made me feel better. It didn't, because there was something in the way he said it that felt temporary, like he was letting me believe that, for now. "I've got work," he added, grabbing his keys from the counter. "Good," I said, maybe a little too quickly. He smirked slightly, like he caught that. "Relax," he said. "I'm not going to jump you in the kitchen." "That's not what I meant," I replied, but my voice betrayed me again. "Sure," he said lightly. He headed toward the door, then paused, just for a second, and without turning around, he said, "We'll see how long this ends here lasts." Then he walked out. The front door closed behind him, and the house went quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel calm. It felt like the silence was waiting, like something had already been set in motion, and I was just pretending I had control over it. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time after he left, staring at nothing, replaying every word, every look, every second. I meant what I said. I had to mean it. This couldn't keep happening. It wouldn't. I just needed to stay strong, stay focused, stay away. That was the plan. It should have been simple. But deep down, there was this nagging feeling I couldn't shake. Because the truth was, the hardest part wasn't avoiding him. It was fighting the part of myself that didn't want to. And I was starting to realize that part might be stronger than I thought. The rest of that day dragged in a way that felt almost deliberate, like time itself was testing me. I tried to stick to the plan. I left the house, drove aimlessly for a while, ended up at a grocery store I didn't need to be at, walking up and down aisles without really seeing anything. I filled a cart with random things, just to feel normal, like I was still someone who cared about dinner plans and laundry detergent, and not whatever my life had turned into overnight. But none of it worked, because no matter where I went, my mind kept circling back to him, to the way he looked at me that morning, to the way he said, "We'll see how long this lasts." It wasn't cocky, it wasn't even teasing, it was certain, and that certainty got under my skin more than anything else. By the time I got back home, the sun was already starting to dip, casting that late afternoon glow through the windows that made everything feel softer than it actually was. I stood in the driveway for a minute before going inside, gripping the steering wheel like I needed a second to prepare. This was my house, my space. I shouldn't feel like I was walking into something I couldn't control. But I did. I grabbed the grocery bags and went inside, setting everything down on the kitchen counter. The house was quiet again, just like it had been the day before. For a second, I thought maybe he wasn't home yet. Relief flickered through me. Then I heard the shower running upstairs, and just like that, everything inside me tightened again. I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. Ignore it. Stay downstairs. Stick to the plan. I started unpacking the groceries, focusing on small, meaningless tasks, putting things in the fridge, organizing shelves that didn't need organizing, anything to keep my hands busy and my thoughts from spiraling. But it didn't last, because the sound of the water upstairs didn't fade into the background. It got louder. Or maybe I was just listening for it. Either way, I couldn't ignore it, and I hated that. I finished putting everything away, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and just stood there for a second, thinking, fighting, arguing with myself in a way that felt exhausting. Don't go up there. That's it. That's the only rule. And for a moment, I actually believed I could follow it. Until I didn't. I don't even remember making the decision. One second I was standing in the kitchen, the next I was halfway up the stairs, my heart already racing like it knew exactly where this was going. The sound of the shower was clearer now, echoing slightly through the hallway. I stopped a few steps away from his door, closed this time. That should have been enough. That should have been the barrier I needed. But it wasn't, because now I knew what was on the other side, and that knowledge pulled at me in a way I couldn't explain. I stood there for what felt like a long time, staring at the door, my mind screaming at me to turn around, to walk away, to stop before I crossed another line I couldn't come back from. But my hand lifted anyway, and this time I knocked. Soft, quick, like I could still pretend I wasn't really doing this. The water shut off almost immediately. Silence followed. Then his voice, slightly muffled, came through the door. "Yeah." I swallowed, suddenly aware of how this looked, how this felt, how there was no good reason for me to be standing here. I need to grab some towels from the hall closet, I said, the excuse coming out rushed, uneven. There was a pause, long enough that I wondered if he was smiling on the other side. "Door's unlocked," he said. Of course it was. My hand moved to the knob before I could second guess it. I pushed the door open. Steam hit me first, warm and thick, curling out into the hallway. The room smelled like soap and something faintly familiar, his cologne maybe, lingering in the air. The bathroom door inside his room was slightly open, the light spilling out. I could hear him moving around in there. "You could have just grabbed towels without coming in," he said from inside, his voice clearer now. "I didn't want to just walk in," I replied, though that wasn't exactly true. A small, almost amused exhale came from the bathroom. Right. I stepped further into the room, closing the door behind me without really thinking about it. The click of it shutting sounded louder than it should have. I walked toward the closet, opening it, grabbing a couple of towels just to make the whole thing look real. But I didn't leave. I stayed there, standing in the middle of his room again, the same place where everything had started. The bathroom door creaked open, and then he stepped out. A towel was wrapped low around his waist, water still dripping from his hair, sliding down his neck and across his chest in slow lines that were impossible not to notice. I should have looked away. I didn't. We just stood there, facing each other, the air between us thick with everything we hadn't resolved. "You got your towels," he said. It wasn't a question. I glanced down at the ones in my hands, almost like I'd forgotten why I was holding them. Yeah, but I didn't move. Again. Something about that made his expression shift slightly. Not surprised, not confused, just aware. "You're not leaving," he said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. I felt my grip tighten slightly on the towels. "I should," I said, but I didn't. His gaze held mine, steady, searching. "Then why aren't you?" he asked. There it was again, that question I couldn't answer without saying something I wasn't ready to admit. "I don't know," I said honestly, and that felt more dangerous than any excuse, because it was real. He took a step closer, slow, deliberate, giving me enough time to back away if I wanted to. I didn't. The distance between us closed again, just like it had in the kitchen,